person who has lost a loved one surely knows, secretly, deeply, that no war, no act of revenge, no daisy cutters dropped on someone else's loved ones or someone else's children will blunt the edges of their pain or bring their own loved ones back. War cannot avenge those who have died. War is only a brutal desecration of their memory. To fuel yet another war, this time against Iraq, by cynically manipulating people's grief, by packaging it for TV specials sponsored by corporations selling detergent and running shoes, is to cheapen and devalue grief, to drain it of meaning. What we are seeing now is a vulgar display of the business of grief, the commerce of grief, the pillaging of even the most private human feelings for political purpose.
The Iraq Study Group also recommended for Iraq to privatize its oil industry and to open it up to international companies. The author and activist Antonia Yuhas has been closely watching this aspect of the Iraq reconstruction process. She's author of The Bush Agenda, Invading the World, One Economy at a Time. Antonia Yuhas, thanks for joining us in studio in San Francisco. Your response to the report not talked about almost at all the issue of privatization.
Yeah, absolutely, and good morning, Amy. It's a completely radical proposal made straightforward in the Iraq Study Group report that the Iraqi national oil industry should be reorganized as a commercial enterprise. The proposal also says that, as you say, Iraq's oil should be opened up to private foreign energy and oil companies. Also, another radical proposal that all of Iraq's oil revenues should be centralized in the central government. And the report calls for a U.S. advisor to ensure that a new national oil law is passed in Iraq to make all of this possible, and that the Constitution of Iraq is amended to ensure that the central government gains control of Iraq's oil revenues. All told, the report calls for privatization of Iraq's oil, turning it over to private foreign corporate hands, putting all of the oil in the hands of the central government, and essentially, I would argue, extending the war in Iraq to ensure that U.S. oil companies get what the Bush administration went in there for, control and greater access to Iraq's oil.
No fuss with them straight, but Mrs. said them lean. No fuss with them kind, but Mrs. said them mean. No fuss with them right, but Mrs. said them green. Say that them a shine, but me not see no sheen. How them a lava and them a push the steam. When out,
your visit comes at a time when there's great debate in Ireland about our role in the war in Iraq, the situation there right now. Last night you were asked about the Irish government's decision to allow US planes and forces to stop at Shannon. You said, if this is true, this is participation in what Nuremberg called a supreme international crime. Are you saying that the Irish government are guilty of war crimes?
Well, if I quoted at the Nuremberg trial Justice Jackson, the chief counsel, who was very eloquent about the fact that the crimes we are now, for which we are now sentencing the present accused, are general crimes. If we are ever guilty of them, we must be subjected to the same judgment. And he was very clear and properly eloquent about that.
But it's not that far from the next step, which is that Bertie Ahern, on that basis, is a war criminal.
That's for you to decide. If you participate,
this was your opinion.
Well, my opinion is that of the Nuremberg Tribunal. That invasion of another country is, in their words, the supreme international crime, which encompasses within it all of the evil that follows.
Well, my question is, if a person allows those forces to travel through our country, our jurisdiction, the
Taoiseach...
Taoiseach...
it's participation. You have to decide to what extent participation...
Does that make the person, the Taoiseach, who approves that decision, a war criminal?
Well, ask yourself the same question. Take the time when the Russians were invading Afghanistan.
Your conclusion, knowing what you know at this stage.
Just consider the analogy. Suppose the Russians, take the 80s when the Russians were invading Afghanistan. Geography isn't right, but suppose that they had been sending their military forces through Shannon to land there and then go on to invade Afghanistan. Would that have been participation in the invasion of Afghanistan?
Do you think you can make the conclusion yourself? Can you tell us what you think?
Yes, I mean, it's not even my conclusion. It's just like 2 and 2 equals 4. It's participation.
Is a war criminal.
Well, what is exactly a war criminal is an open question.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
It is participation in a major crime.
You quote Nuremberg, obviously this definition given there, but the Irish government quote the UN resolution passed again last November, which says that all countries should support the Iraqi people in their pursuit of peace, stability, security, democracy and prosperity, and say the use of Shannon by the US is part of that effort.
Well, that's up to the Iraqi people, of whom the vast majority want the occupation forces to leave. The British Defence Ministry just carried out a poll which was leaked to the British press, which found 82% want the occupation forces either leave immediately or as soon as government's formed. 1% think that they're improving security.
But the government has to look to international law, clearly.
And
it's looking to this UN resolution.
The UN resolution says nothing about the legitimacy of the war. It said exactly what you said.
It does call on
the
international community to support stability, peace, security, democracy and prosperity.
And security, peace, democracy and prosperity doesn't mean fighting a war. It means observing the will of the victims.
But the issue here is whether or not the Irish government is right to allow US troops going, we're assuming, to try and create security in Iraq.
No, that's what you're assuming. But that's like saying the Russians were trying to secure security and peace in Afghanistan, which indeed they were. But that didn't mean that one should abet a war crime.
Can I ask about this issue of rendition, which is the transport of prisoners as part of sort of a secret network within the war on terror by the Americans? There are many flights, scores of flights, that have landed in Irish airports, which were linked to this rendition program in one way or the other. The American government says emphatically no prisoners were on those flights. It would be an amazingly open, egregious lie from one ally to another, wouldn't it, if they were actually transporting prisoners? Do you think they're capable of that lie?
I mean, is there any question of it? And of course, governments lie all the time. This government has lied repeatedly and continues to. And it really doesn't matter whether there are prisoners on it. Suppose the planes are refueled at Shannon and then carry prisoners for what's called rendition. Rendition is just a fancy word which means torture. Okay, so suppose that planes are landing, being refueled, then being sent on to abet torture. Well, then the Irish people have to ask themselves, do we want to participate in torture?
So the only moral course now is to stop these planes even landing at Shannon?
Look, anything involved in rendition is such a grotesque crime that even
inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And then he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, I never sin to know for whom the bell tolls.